For years, Zendaya has been seen as untouchable, calm, polished, perfect. The kind of star who seems to glide through life while the rest of the world struggles to catch up. But behind that image, there's a story no one really knew. At 29, she finally sat down and spoke openly about her life at this stage. About the childhood trauma she carried quietly, the moments of heartbreak that shaped her, and the struggles that never made the headlines. She revealed secrets she had kept private for years, things the public didn't see and the media never asked about. She addressed the rumors that have followed her for years, whispers about relationships, attitude, and who she really is. And for the first time, she confirmed some of them, while completely shutting down others, exposing a reality that shocked everyone. This wasn't a carefully curated interview. This wasn't a rehearsed public statement. It was raw, honest, and controlled on her own terms. And what she said now changes everything people thought they knew about her. Because the truth? The real story of Zendaya is far more complicated and far more human than anyone expected. And in this video, we're going to take you there. Every revelation, every secret, every moment that shaped the star behind the headlines. Long before the fame, before the red carpets, before millions of people knew her name, Zendaya was just a kid growing up in Oakland, California. But even as a kid, things didn't feel simple. Her world wasn't built around toys or carefree afternoons. It revolved around work, discipline, and watching adults navigate real-life problems up close. Her mother worked in education. Her father had a background tied to performance and management. That meant she spent a lot of time in spaces where people were constantly working, rehearsing, or trying to make something happen. She saw how hard things could be. Money wasn't always stable. Opportunities weren't guaranteed. And that kind of environment changes how a child thinks. You start paying attention earlier. You start understanding things you're not really supposed to think about yet. She wasn't shielded from reality. Instead, she absorbed it. While other kids her age were focused on school and friends, she was watching rehearsals, sitting quietly in theater spaces, learning how people presented themselves in front of others, and how different that could be from who they were off stage. That contrast stuck with her. The idea that people could perform, could control what others see. That became normal. And in a way, it became a skill. She learned how to observe before speaking, how to read a room, how to stay composed even when things felt uncertain. Those are things adults struggle to learn. But for her, they started forming early. There were also moments that didn't feel fair. Moments where she noticed differences. How people were treated, how opportunities weren't always equal, how expectations could shift depending on how you looked or where you came from. She didn't always have the words for it at the time, but she felt it. And when you grow up noticing those things, it stays with you. It shapes how you move. It shapes how much of yourself you show. By the time she started stepping into small roles and auditions, she wasn't walking in as a typical kid chasing a dream. She was already careful, already aware of what was at stake. Because for her, it wasn't just about wanting to perform. It was about making it work, about helping her family, about not wasting an opportunity that might not come again. That kind of pressure doesn't always show on the surface. From the outside, she looked confident, focused, even calm. But underneath, there was already a pattern forming. Stay composed. Stay controlled. Don't give too much away. Because once people see too much, they start to decide things about you. And that was something she learned early she didn't want to lose control over. When Zendaya landed her role on Shake It Up, everything shifted almost overnight. One day, she was auditioning, trying to stand out in rooms full of kids who all wanted the same thing. The next, she was on a set, part of a machine that moved fast and didn't slow down for anyone. Disney wasn't just a job. It was structure. It was branding. It was expectation. And for a teenager, it was a lot. The schedule alone was enough to change everything. Long hours, constant filming, rehearsals, press appearances. It became her routine. School didn't disappear, but it had to fit around everything else. Friends became harder to maintain. Normal teenage moments started slipping away. But what really changed was how she was seen. Suddenly, people knew her. Not just locally, not just in small circles. Millions of viewers were watching her every week. Kids looked up to her. Parents trusted her image. And with that came a very specific kind of pressure. She had to be good. Not just talented, not just successful, but clean, polished, and controlled. There wasn't much room for mistakes. Every interview mattered. Every public appearance mattered. Even the way she spoke, laughed, or reacted to things, it all became part of a version of herself that had to stay consistent. And she understood that quickly. Instead of pushing against it, she adapted. She watched how others handled it. She paid attention to what worked and what didn't. And she learned how to stay within the lines without losing her footing. But staying within those lines came at a cost. It meant holding things in. It meant choosing words carefully. It meant thinking twice before reacting naturally. Over time, that kind of awareness becomes second nature, but it also creates distance. Distance between what you feel and what you show. There were also early whispers. Rumors that she was too serious. That she wasn't like other Disney stars. That she seemed more reserved, more controlled. Some people read that as confidence. Others saw it as something else. She didn't respond to any of it. Instead, she kept working. But behind that steady image, there were moments where the pressure built up. Moments where she felt like she had to get everything right. Not just for herself, but for the people depending on her. Because by then, it wasn't just about her anymore. Her success meant stability for her family. It meant opportunities that hadn't existed before. And that made every decision feel heavier. Walking away wasn't an option. Slipping up didn't feel like an option either. So she stayed focused, stayed careful, stayed in control. And that control became part of how people saw her. But what they didn't see was how much effort it took to maintain it. As Zendaya started moving beyond Shake It Up, the expectations didn't fade, they changed. She wasn't just a Disney star anymore. Now, she had to prove she could be more. That transition is where a lot of young actors struggle. The image that made them famous can also hold them back. People get used to seeing them one way, and breaking out of that takes time and risk. For her, it meant stepping into new roles, new environments, and a different kind of spotlight. The audience got older. The criticism got sharper. Social media played a huge role in that shift. Every appearance, every outfit, every interview, everything was analyzed. Not just by critics, but by millions of people with opinions, all sharing them instantly. And those opinions weren't always kind. There were comments about how she looked, comments about her race, questions about where she fit in an industry that often tried to put people into clear categories. She didn't always respond publicly, but she saw it, and it added another layer to the pressure. It wasn't enough to just do her job well. She had to represent something bigger. She had to navigate conversations about identity, expectations, and perception, all while still trying to build her career. At the same time, there was this growing expectation that she wouldn't mess up. Not even a little. Other young celebrities could make mistakes and recover. But for her, it felt different. There was this unspoken understanding that she had to stay composed, stay smart, stay ahead of anything that could be used against her. So she tightened her control even more. Interviews became more measured. Public appearances became more intentional. Even her social media presence reflected that balance. Personal enough to connect, but controlled enough to avoid controversy. From the outside, it looked effortless. But internally, it was constant. Constant awareness. Constant adjustment. Constant pressure to stay aligned with an image that had become bigger than her. There were moments where that pressure showed up in quieter ways. Exhaustion. Overthinking. Second-guessing decisions that seemed simple on the surface. Because when everything you do is being watched, even small choices start to feel important. And over time, that kind of pressure builds. It doesn't explode all at once. It sits there, underneath everything, shaping how you move, how you think, how much of yourself you allow people to see. She kept pushing forward, taking on bigger roles, expanding her reach, proving again and again that she could handle it. But behind that steady rise, something else was forming. A quiet weight that didn't go away. By the time Zendaya reached her mid to late 20s, the rumors had become constant. They weren't new. Some had been following her for years. But now, they were louder, more persistent, harder to ignore. A lot of them centered around her personal life, especially her relationship with Tom Holland. Fans speculated constantly. Every appearance together, every photo, every small interaction, it all turned into headlines. People tried to read between the lines, to figure out what was real and what wasn't. For a long time, she stayed quiet. Not because she didn't notice, but because responding to rumors often makes them bigger. She understood that, so she let people talk. But silence has its own consequences. When you don't correct something, people fill in the gaps themselves. And those gaps can turn into assumptions. Beyond relationships, there were other rumors too. Some people said she was too controlled, that she calculated everything, that she kept people at a distance. Others questioned her authenticity, wondering if the calm, composed version of her was real or just another performance. Those kinds of rumors are harder to deal with, because they're not about one moment or one event. They're about who people think you are. And when enough people start repeating something, it begins to stick. Even if it's not true. She didn't come out and deny every claim. She didn't try to reshape every narrative. Instead, she stayed consistent, at least publicly, focused on her work, focused on her image. But behind that consistency, there were moments where the weight of it showed. Because being misunderstood, over and over again, starts to wear on you. Especially when you don't feel like you can fully explain yourself. There's also the reality that the more successful you become, the less privacy you have. Things that should be personal become public discussion. Decisions that should be yours alone get analyzed by people who don't know you. And at some point, that starts to feel invasive. She learned how to navigate it. How to give just enough without giving everything. How to stay present without becoming fully accessible. But even with that balance, the rumors didn't stop. If anything, they grew. Because the less she said, the more people wanted to know. And that curiosity kept building. Until eventually, it reached a point where staying silent wasn't as easy as it used to be. From the outside, Zendaya looked like she had everything under control. Her career kept moving forward. The roles were getting bigger. The recognition was growing. Interviews were smooth. Appearances were polished. And nothing seemed out of place. But behind closed doors, things didn't always feel that steady. The pace of her life had been intense for years. And it didn't slow down. If anything, it picked up. Projects overlapped. Expectations increased. And with each new role, there was more at stake. There wasn't much time to pause. Even when she wasn't working, her mind didn't fully switch off. Scripts, schedules, decisions, it all stayed in rotation. And over time, that kind of constant mental activity starts to wear you down. There were days where she felt exhausted in a way that sleep didn't fix. Days where being around people, even people she trusted, felt draining instead of comforting. Not because anything was wrong with them, but because she had spent so much time being on, that turning it off didn't come naturally. Isolation doesn't always look obvious. It can happen quietly, even when you're surrounded by people. For her, it showed up in small ways. Pulling back from conversations. Keeping things to herself instead of opening up. Choosing to deal with things internally rather than explaining them out loud. Part of that came from trust. The industry she was in didn't always reward vulnerability. Sharing too much could be used against you. Being open could turn into headlines. And once something becomes public, it's no longer yours. So she learned to hold things in. Even with people close to her, there were limits. There were also moments where the pressure felt heavier than usual. Not because of one specific event, but because everything stacked together. Work, expectations, public attention, personal life. It created this constant background noise that never fully went away. She kept functioning, kept showing up, kept delivering. But internally, there were points where she questioned how long she could keep doing it at that level without something giving. Walking away crossed her mind more than once. Not as a sudden decision, just as a quiet thought that came up during moments of exhaustion. What if she stepped back? What if she took a break long enough to reset? But then reality set in. The timing, the commitments, the people depending on her, the momentum she had built. Stepping away wasn't simple. So instead, she adjusted. She became more selective with who she spent time with, more careful with what she shared, more focused on protecting her energy in whatever ways she could. From the outside, those changes weren't always visible, but they were there. Small shifts that helped her keep going, even if it meant carrying more than people realized. Working on Euphoria changed things for Zendaya in a way that wasn't obvious at first. The role demanded something different. It wasn't controlled or polished like her earlier work. It was raw, unpredictable, emotionally intense. The kind of performance that doesn't just require skill, it requires access to parts of yourself you don't always want to revisit. And she gave it everything. Scene after scene, she pushed herself deeper into the character. Long shooting days turned into long emotional stretches. Some moments were heavy enough that they didn't just stay on set, they followed her home. That's the part people don't always see. When you play a character dealing with addiction, pain, and instability, you don't just flip a switch when the camera stops rolling. Some of it lingers. For her, that line between work and real life started to blur. It wasn't constant, but it happened enough to notice. There were days where she felt emotionally drained before the day even started. Days where certain scenes took more out of her than expected. Days where she had to push through simply because the schedule didn't allow for anything else. At the same time, the show was gaining attention. Critical praise, awards, recognition. From the outside, it looked like a major success, and it was. But success doesn't cancel out the toll it takes to get there. If anything, it adds to it. Because now, there was an expectation to keep delivering at that level, to go even deeper, to keep raising the standard. And that pressure sat on top of everything else she was already carrying. There came a point where she started to feel it clearly, not as a sudden collapse, but as a buildup that reached a limit. Fatigue that didn't go away. Emotional weight that felt heavier than usual. A sense that she needed space, even if she didn't fully know how to take it. That was the moment where something shifted. Not publicly, not in a way that people immediately noticed, but internally, she recognized it. She couldn't keep moving at the same pace without adjusting something. So she started making small changes, taking time between projects, being more intentional about rest, creating boundaries where she could, even if they weren't always perfect. It wasn't a full reset, but it was a start. Because once you reach that kind of breaking point, even quietly, you don't ignore it. You adapt. For years, Zendaya had built a reputation for being careful with her words. She answered questions without giving too much away. She acknowledged things without fully confirming them. She stayed present, but controlled. That approach worked for a long time. Until it didn't. At 29, something changed. It wasn't a single moment that caused it. It was everything leading up to it. The years of pressure, the constant rumors, the emotional weight, the need to keep everything balanced. Eventually, holding back takes more effort than speaking up. And in one interview, that shift became visible. The question itself wasn't new. It touched on things people had been speculating about for years. Her personal life, her relationships, the way she navigated fame, the perception that she was always in control. Normally, she would have answered carefully. But this time, she didn't deflect in the same way. She didn't reveal everything. She didn't go into details that weren't hers to share. But she confirmed enough. Enough to make it clear that some of the rumors weren't completely off. Enough to show that her silence hadn't been about hiding something dramatic. It had been about protecting her space. She spoke about the pressure of being watched constantly. About how easy it is for people to form opinions without knowing the full story. About how maintaining control over her image had been both a choice and a necessity. She also addressed the idea that she was distant. Not by denying it, but by explaining it. Saying that sometimes distance is the only way to stay grounded. That not everything needs to be public to be real. That protecting parts of your life doesn't mean you're being fake. It means you're setting boundaries. When it came to her relationship with Tom Holland, she didn't turn it into a headline moment. She acknowledged it in a way that felt normal. Not exaggerated. Not hidden. Just real. And that, more than anything, is what surprised people. Because after years of speculation, the reality wasn't dramatic. It was simple, honest, but measured. For some people, that clarity changed everything. It shifted how they saw her, not as someone hiding behind an image, but as someone who had been managing it carefully all along. For others, it raised more questions. Because when someone finally opens up, even a little, it makes people wonder what else they've been holding back. But for her, the goal wasn't to answer everything. It was to take back control of the narrative in her own way, to speak just enough to be understood, without giving away everything that still belonged to her. And once that line is drawn, it doesn't go back to what it was before. Because now, people know she's willing to speak. Even if it's only when she decides the time is right. After that shift, Zendaya didn't suddenly become more open in the way people expected. If anything, she became more intentional. There's a difference. Before, she was careful because she had to be. Now, she was careful because she chose to be. That control felt different. It showed up in the way she approached work first. Scripts that once might have been automatic yes now got more attention. She looked at what a role required, not just physically, but emotionally. What it would take from her. How long it would stay with her after filming ended. That kind of thinking doesn't come from ambition alone. Comes from experience. From knowing what burnout feels like. From recognizing that not every opportunity is worth the cost. So she slowed down, even if it wasn't obvious from the outside. Projects became more spaced out. Breaks became more important. Time that used to be filled automatically started being protected. That same approach carried into her public life. Interviews didn't stop, but they shifted. She still answered questions, still showed up, still engaged, but there was a clearer boundary between what she was willing to share and what she wasn't. And she didn't feel the need to explain those boundaries anymore. Before, there might have been a sense of needing to justify her privacy, to make it understandable, acceptable. Now it just was. If she didn't want to answer something, she didn't. If she chose to share something, it was because she wanted to, not because it was expected. That kind of clarity changes how people interact with you. Some respected it immediately. Others pushed against it, trying to get more, asking deeper questions, looking for reactions. But she stayed consistent, and consistency over time sets the tone. Her relationship with the public also started to feel different. For years, she had been part of a system where being accessible was almost required. Fans wanted connection. Media wanted content. The line between those two things often blurred. But now, she redefined that connection. It wasn't about giving constant updates or sharing every part of her life. It was about showing up when it mattered. Through her work, through the moments she chose to share, through the way she carried herself publicly. Less noise, more intention. Even on social media, the shift was noticeable. Posts weren't frequent, but when they came, they felt deliberate. Not random, not reactive, just controlled in a way that matched where she was mentally. There was also a subtle change in how she carried herself in public. She seemed more grounded, less like she was navigating expectations, more like she was setting them. That doesn't mean everything became easy. The industry didn't change overnight. The pressure didn't disappear. The attention didn't fade. But her relationship with those things changed. And that made a difference. Because when you stop trying to meet every expectation, and start deciding which ones actually matter, things shift. Not externally at first, but internally. And that's where it starts. At 29, Zendaya isn't at the beginning of her career anymore. But she's not at the end of anything either. She's in a space that's harder to define. Experienced but still evolving. Established, but still figuring things out in real time. And after everything she's said, and everything she hasn't, people are looking at her differently now. Not just as a performer, but as someone who has been navigating a very specific kind of pressure for a long time. The way she handled the rumors, the silence, the eventual shift, it all adds context. It explains why she moved the way she did. Why she stayed quiet when people expected answers. Why she chose control over reaction. And now that she's started to open that door, even just slightly, there's a new kind of attention around her. Not just curiosity, but expectation. People want to know what comes next. Will she speak more openly moving forward? Will she keep things at the same level? Will her work reflect this shift in a more visible way? Those questions don't have clear answers. And that's part of the point. Because if there's one thing she's made clear, it's that not everything needs to be explained. Not everything needs to be shared. What matters is that she's choosing how to move forward on her own terms. That applies to her career first. The role she takes, the project she leads, the story she decides to be part of, they'll likely continue to reflect that balance between challenge and control. Not chasing attention. Not avoiding it either. Just choosing what aligns. It also applies to her personal life. The way she handled discussions around Tom Holland made that clear. There's a boundary there. Not a wall, but a line. And that line isn't moving just because people are curious. That kind of stability matters. Especially in an environment where things can change quickly, where narratives can shift overnight. Having a clear sense of what stays private and what becomes public, it creates a level of consistency that not everyone manages to maintain. And then there's the broader impact. Because whether she intended it or not, the way she handled this moment sets an example. Not in a dramatic way, not as a statement, but through action, showing that it's possible to exist in a space that demands visibility while still holding on to parts of yourself. Showing that you don't have to respond to everything immediately. That silence can be a choice, not a weakness. That opening up doesn't have to mean giving everything away. As for what comes next, it's likely to be quieter than people expect. Not in terms of success, but in terms of noise. Fewer reactions. Fewer unnecessary moments. More focus on what actually matters to her. And that might not always line up with what people want to see. But at this stage, that doesn't seem to be the priority anymore. She's already proven what she can do. Now, it's about how she chooses to do it. So, after everything she finally said, and everything she chose not to, what do you think? Was the silence worth it? Did it change how you see her? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you made it this far, hit like. It really helps more than you think. If you're into real stories like this, the kind people don't always talk about, go ahead and subscribe. We're going to keep digging into these lives, piece by piece. Until the next one, take it easy.